Fantasy Football. I'm your host, Jacob Stuckey. I hope you guys are doing well. We're going into week 8 of the NFL season, as well as the fantasy football season. So we got a lot to talk about, a lot of news to go over, a lot of waiver wire targets. So let's get into it. A couple of big things to go over. You guys probably have already heard, but in case you didn't, the biggest one was that Breece Hall, who was going on a tear for the Jets. He was doing super well. He did tear his ACL, which sucks. It sucks to see that. He was having a great season. I really wish I had him on my teams. He was a guy that I was trying to trade for, and injuries, they just happen. There's nothing that you can do as a fantasy manager to prepare for it. You just kind of have to go with the win and go with the blows that your team take, and you got to figure out where to go from there. So a couple of big updates with that, which I thought was really interesting, is that he's out for the season. And so the Jets were going to turn to Michael Carter, who was already kind of in like a committee with Breece Hall. But yesterday on Monday, the Jets did trade for James Robinson from the Jaguars. So super interesting, which has implications for two different sides, which I think is good to go over. So the first side being the Jets. If you had Michael Carter, you're probably thinking, oh, sweet, like I can fully play him now. He can be a full starter without having to share with other people. Well, it looks like he's probably still going to have to share, which is kind of a bummer. I think that Michael Carter is still going to get the majority as of right now because James Robinson is getting used to a new team. Sounds like he's dealing with knee soreness. So I think Michael Carter is still going to be the main guy right now. But they did just trade for a pretty good running back who is definitely capable of splitting snaps, at least. So that's kind of a bummer for the Jets outcome, as well as I think it's probably good for James Robinson managers. I think that's probably a good scenario because how it was trending in Jacksonville, it was looking like he was going to get benched in favor of ETN anyways. So, yeah, so the other side, Travis Etienne, is now like, in my mind, I feel like now he's an RB1, which is crazy. So a couple weeks ago, I was kind of going off about how I felt like you should trade for him. I felt like it was a matter of time until something like this happened. And so now it's happened. And the buy window on him is closed. Like, there's no way you're going to be able to trade for him now. If the manager in your league who has ETN wants to trade him, I would do it. I think ETN is a really good player. I think he's obviously healthy, which is a huge sign, and the Jaguars love him. So all of those things I think are a recipe for a great rest of the season. He even showed on Sunday, as he was able to get the majority of the carries, that he can do work with it. So if you're somehow able to trade for Travis Etienne, do it. Absolutely. I mean, obviously you need to, when I say trade for him, I'm not telling you to trade your whole team for him. You got to have kind of boundaries drawn somewhere. But if the manager is open to a package and you have depth on your team where you feel like you can leverage it for Travis Etienne, I would do it. So that's kind of the biggest news that I think has just been kind of crazy, seeing a trade notification pop up yesterday. So a bunch of other injury news I think is good to note, because with these guys who are injured, I think there are also other guys you should keep your eye on in case they get more work. So one of those guys being DK Metcalf. He did suffer a knee injury in the Sunday's game. He was carted off the field, and so everyone was kind of freaking out, rightfully so. Pete Carroll has come out, and I mean, Pete's always like this, so it's hard to know. He's always like, smile on his face, everything's great, I'm not going to tell you the truth kind of a guy in my mind. He's very optimistic. And so he came out Monday and said, we got a very, very positive report on DK Metcalf. It's sounding good. So it's hard to fully know what that means, but it does sound like he won't need surgery, which is great news. Like, that is very positive news. But he's still probably going to miss some time. Pete just hasn't really said. So sounds like DK wants to practice this week, and Pete was like, we'll see if that actually happens. So wait to know more on this situation, but my guess is that he probably will miss a couple games. But the fact that he doesn't need surgery for a knee injury is great news. And so we'll talk in the waiver wire column about what you should do next in regards to if there's any other guys you should pick up, because I think there is a guy that can definitely benefit from this. Another injury, small injury, was Amon-Ra St. Brown. He did suffer, at first they called it a concussion. He was ruled out for the rest of the game, but it sounds like the head coach, Dan Campbell, did say that it doesn't sound like it was a concussion. He's cleared of having a concussion, but he's still in the protocol. But according to the head coach, sounds like he has a really good chance of playing this week. So that's great news, because right now the fear is like as soon as the guy gets into the protocol, it's like, oh, I'm out. They're out for another week. So the fact that he has a real shot to play for week 8 is great. We talked about James Robinson. He's dealing with some knee soreness. We're going to kind of have to wait to see if the Jets are going to slowly ease him into their offense, if they're going to maybe give him a couple weeks. Maybe that was part of the trade that they knew about. I don't know. We'll just have to see. Mike Williams, this was a bummer. He suffered a high ankle sprain. Sounds like he is going to miss some time. Normally a high ankle sprain recovery is between 4 to 6 weeks. Well, now I think they're calling it 2 to 6 weeks, just because some people have been like pushing that envelope a little bit. So, but I think he's probably more on the 4 to 6 week side is kind of what it sounds like. But Brandon Staley said on Monday afternoon that it's a matter of weeks and not days. So, and the fact that they've held out Keenan Allen for so long for his hamstring injury makes me believe that Mike Williams is probably going to be held out for several weeks. They are on bye this week, which is good. But we're going to have to wait to see how many weeks after that he's going to miss, which is a bummer because I think he's a really good player. I think he was playing really well. And I think we were kind of looking forward, especially for Justin Herbert managers, you were looking forward to having both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen on the field. But it sounds like that's going to have to wait. Allen Lazard, he's dealing with a shoulder injury. He left late in the game. We haven't really been told what the extent of this is yet. Sounds like I think he's okay. Like I think he has a pretty good shot of playing for week 8. But we're still kind of waiting to hear more. David Njoku, he also suffered a high ankle sprain, which is a bummer because he was having a great season. And he was kind of in my mind, I thought he was kind of a star for fantasy purposes for tight end because that position is so barren. But sounds like he won't need surgery, which is good, but he's going to miss around 2 to 6 weeks is kind of what they're saying. So wait to hear more on which side of the 2 to 6 weeks he's on, but sounds like he's going to miss some time. Daniel Bellinger, another tight end who I thought was playing really well. This one was really weird. This is just unfortunate and definitely like some of the risks of playing like a dangerous game, but he did suffer a fracture around his eye socket and septum. And it might require surgery. Sounds like everyone after the game was saying that his eye looked terrible, but he did get poked in the eye. And yeah, just super unfortunate for a guy that was like finally finding room in his offense. I thought he was going to continue to keep playing well, and the Giants were definitely leaning into him. And at the tight end position, that's a position that you definitely like are trying to grab at scraps for. So I think he was playing really well, and it's kind of a bummer that right when he starts to become relevant for fantasy, he gets poked in the eye. But I also, fantasy aside, like I hope he's okay because having an eye injury like that does not sound fun, and I'm sure that was really scary for him and his family. So yeah, hopefully they're able to get everything sorted out with that injury and that recovery, but sounds like he's going to be out for several weeks. All right, another big one, Matt Ryan. This one I thought was really interesting. I thought it was a matter of time, but I didn't think it was going to happen this fast. So injury-related news and also non-injury related news. But yesterday, basically a report came out saying Matt Ryan is going to get benched for Sam Ehlinger. That's what the headlines were saying, and everyone was like, whoa, benched. Like, he's not hurt, but he's like getting benched. Like Matt Ryan, the guy that they just traded for. Like, that's crazy. And so the headlines came out, everyone's freaking out. I was freaking out. And then 2 minutes later, another headline said, oh, Matt Ryan has a grade 2 shoulder sprain. And so then I was like, oh, So he didn't get benched? Like, oh, he isn't playing because he's hurt, and so that's why Sam's playing? And then another report came out saying from Frank Reich, the head coach, oh, we were going to bench him anyways. And so then you're like, what? So as of right now, it could change today, it could change tomorrow. As of right now, it sounds like the story is Matt Ryan is dealing with a shoulder injury, grade 2 sprain, and he's not going to play in week 8 anyways. But because of how he has been playing, because of his recent performances, Frank Reich and the rest of the Colts staff decided to bench Matt Ryan, make Sam Ehlinger the starter, and they said that he's a starter for the rest of the year, and they made Nick Foles the backup quarterback, and Matt Ryan's number 3. So crazy stuff. I think this has a lot of fantasy implications, and this is one of the main things I wanted to talk about in today's episode is, okay, you're talking about a totally different kind of quarterback change. Like, you're changing from a late 30s quarterback who has been around for a long time, who is a good quarterback in Matt Ryan, but he's not a mobile quarterback. He's a gunslinger. He kind of like a Peyton Manning, where he just likes to throw the ball for 50 times. And it's been crazy to me. It's blown my mind how many attempts he's had this season. Like, Matt Ryan has thrown the ball a lot, but he also has turned the ball over a lot. And so you're transitioning from Matt Ryan, sit in the pocket, take his time, throw the ball a lot, to Sam Ehlinger, who isn't afraid to run the ball. And I think it's positive for the team. I think it's really positive for the Colts team. I think it should give them a big boost. I'm a big Sam Ehlinger guy. I'm a Texas fan, so that's kind of where my positivity and loyalty comes from. But I also understand that he's a rookie quarterback. He's going to make mistakes. He is probably going to turn the ball over. But I think their hope is that, okay, hey, can't get worse than how many times Matt Ryan's turned the ball over. Let's give this kid a shot, which I think is awesome. I give him props for that, because not many organizations would be willing to do that, knowing that they traded for Matt Ryan. Because you kind of have to swallow that humble pill a little bit and be like, hey, we may have not made the best decision, but we're going to try to make the best decision moving forward, which I think is great. So for NFL and I guess real life football purposes, I think Sam's going to be really good. But now the question is, okay, for fantasy purposes, how is Sam going to affect everyone else? I like Sam Ehlinger in regards to a fantasy football quarterback. I think he could be worth a stream. It's going to be, you're going to like not feel great about it for like the first couple weeks. Like, oh, should I even start this guy because he's a rookie? But if you think about it, he's playing the Commanders this week, which I think is a great spot for him to start and to get started right. And I think because of his rushing ability, I think it can make him really fantasy relevant, which is why if you're struggling at quarterback right now, or if you have a bye week right now, I would be willing to stream Sam Ehlinger. Now, for the rest of the team, I think this is what I'm worried about a little bit. Coming from a guy who likes Sam Ehlinger, I think you got to start thinking about the rest of the team, and especially for fantasy. You have Michael Pittman, your main wide receiver. You have Alec Pierce and Paris Campbell, other two good wide receivers. You have Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines in the backfield. And then you have a bunch of random tight ends. Jelani Woods, Mo Alley Cox, Granson. Like, you got a lot of other players as well. I think the main guys that you're probably concerned about, especially if you have them on your team, is Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor. You're thinking, okay, top 2 Colts fantasy football stars, how is a quarterback change going to affect them? I think for Jonathan Taylor, it should be just the same. Like, I don't think his workload is going to change as much. I think if anything, if you're putting in a rookie quarterback, you're probably going to hand the ball off more to Jonathan Taylor. So if anything, I think it's positive for Taylor for sure. I think you have a quarterback that can he has a real run threat. And I think that's going to open it up for Taylor, because defenses aren't going to fully know, okay, is my quarterback going to keep the ball himself and take it off for 10, 20 yards, or are they going to hand off to Jonathan Taylor? Whereas before with Matt Ryan, if he wasn't going to throw it, he wasn't going to run it. Like, he's going to hand it off to Jonathan Taylor. And so I felt like Matt Ryan was a lot more predictable. You knew he was going to throw 50 times a game, and you knew he was going to turn the ball over. Now, Sam Ehlinger can definitely still struggle with turning the ball over, but I think his run ability is going to definitely help Jonathan Taylor. What I'm a little bit worried about is his accuracy. I think that's something that coming into the draft, everyone was kind of low on him about. I don't think he's as bad as people say in regards to his arm strength. I think he does. I think he has a great arm. A lot of people were kind of like doubting him on that. But his accuracy is definitely, I think, going to be the big question mark coming into his starting tenure, which is mainly and directly going to affect Michael Pittman. Is Sam Ehlinger going to be able to get Michael Pittman the ball? That's the main question. Is he going to be able to hit him in spots? And I think we're just going to have to wait to see. I would like to say yes. I mean, my hope is that he'll be able to. But I think Michael Pittman is still going to be relevant enough. Definitely. Like, you're still playing him, obviously. I just don't know if Michael Pittman's ceiling is the same or lower with Sam Ehlinger. I think right now, it's a little bit lower than when Matt Ryan was the quarterback, just because Matt Ryan was throwing 50 times a game. But Matt Ryan also wasn't perfect. Like, he was struggling himself. And so it's not like Matt Ryan was finding Pittman everywhere. Like, he also was making these small dump off passes, which is why he had so many attempts. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. I think Sam Ehlinger for the long run is going to be really good for fantasy. My hope is that it'll elevate his pass catchers. Like, I hope that Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce and Campbell, I hope they'll be able to benefit from that. I think my gut right now, though, is with his rushing ability and the fact that Jonathan Taylor is still the main identity of this team, I think that Sam could be relevant for fantasy because of his rushing ability, and I think Jonathan Taylor is going to do well. So if you're able to trade for Jonathan Taylor, I would do it for sure, because I think he's going to have a good rest of the year with Sam. But yeah, that was a big news. Something that was really interesting seeing pop up yesterday, that they were benching Matt Ryan and then he was hurt, and then they're like, yo, no, we're benching him. So pretty crazy. A couple other injury news to note. Guys that were held out previous to week 7, so going into the game, it didn't occur during the game. Russell Wilson, he's dealing with a hamstring injury. Sounds like it's a partially torn hamstring, which sucks. He was held out of week 7 due to that injury. Sounds like they're trying to play safe with him, even though knowing Russell, he's trying to play. And so we're going to kind of have to wait to see. I believe they play in London for week 8. So I would probably guess they would hold him out another game, but they haven't come out and said it yet. James Conner and Darrell Williams, running backs for the Cardinals, they're still dealing with their injuries. Darrell Williams, I believe he's already out. So Darrell Williams is kind of already out. He's dealing with a knee injury. Connor's dealing with ribs, so he's still trying to recover. I think he has a chance for week 8, but Cliff has kind of said, like, day to day, up in the air. It'll probably be a game time decision again. So if you have James Conner, keep an eye on him. But it sounds like he has another chance to miss this week. DeAndre Swift, this was a bummer. People were hoping that he was going to play for week 7. He's dealing with ankle and shoulder injuries still. But man, it was a big bummer. They were coming off a week 6 bye, and going into the week, everyone was kind of had the reports that he was going to play. Like, it looked like he was going to play. And then I believe Sunday morning they ruled him out. So that was a big bummer. We're hoping he can come back for week 8. Obviously, they're trying to play safe with him because he is their star player and he has a huge injury history. But we're still kind of waiting to know more if he has a chance for week 8. This is very similar to Keenan Allen's situation in my mind. They're trying to rest their star player and try not to risk or more future injury. And so, yeah, this is a hard one. If you have Swift, I would continue trying to find other options because we don't fully know how long he's going to be out for. I would like to say he's going to fully play this week. We just don't know yet. Darren Waller, hamstring injury. This was another one where coming off a week 6 bye, we were hoping he was going to play, but he did suffer the injury in week 5. So I definitely felt like there was a chance he was going to miss week 7. In regards to week 8, I think he probably will miss it again. If we look at Keenan Allen, like he was held out, I think he was held out 5-6 weeks just because of that hamstring injury. And so I'm not saying it's going to be the same type of recovery or if the team's going to hold him out that long, but knowing Darren Waller and his injury history, I wouldn't be surprised if he misses week 8. Michael Thomas, he is still dealing with that foot injury. We haven't really been told if when he's going to come back or if he's going to come back. I'm surprised they haven't put him on IR at this point. But he hasn't been practicing. He hasn't even started practicing. So if we see him practice this week, I think that's going to be a great sign. And I hope that means that he's going to play for week 8. But as of right now, he hasn't played past several weeks. So if you have him on your team, I would definitely try to find other options as of right now. All right. So that was a lot of news. A lot of interesting fantasy implications. Now we're going to get into the waiver wire segment of the show. And some of those guys that I talked about in regards to the news, I'm going to go over right now. And if you should spend any fab on them, if you should pass on them. But yeah, let's get into it. So running back waiver wire targets, the first guy that I had on my list was Michael Carter. Now keep a note, generally when I do these waiver wire segments, I'm going over guys that are under 50% rostered. This week was interesting because there wasn't any guy that was under 50% rostered that really stood out in regards to, hey, this guy's going to get a workload. You should go get this guy. So the guys I'm going to be going over are a little bit over 50% rostered. So check your leagues. They may already be gone, but if they're available, I would prioritize these guys. And then I also have a couple handcuffs that I'm going to be going over that are definitely under 50% rostered. So first couple guys that are over 50% owned, just a little bit though, at least in the sleeper format, is the first guy being Michael Carter on the Jets. Now, I kind of already talked about it. I think that if he's available in your league and you're trying to decide how much fab to spend, I was ready to say, hey, just get him, like go all in, just because he was going to be the main guy on his team. Now with James Robinson, I think you have to temper your expectations a little bit. I think his split's probably going to be similar to what it's been with Breece Hall, but I would say I would expect it to be a little more positive. I think that they will lean into Michael Carter a little more than Robinson, at least for the start. Robinson does have injury history. He's dealing with knee soreness right now, so keep that in mind as well. But yeah, I'd be willing to spend, man, I think right now, like if you're struggling and you need a running back, I'd be willing to spend 30% of my fab, 35%. And I think depending on the shapes of your team with running back, I'd be willing to spend a little more. But I think you definitely have to kind of temper your expectations with him a little bit. If we look at his stats from last week, he had 9 points, 13 carries for 29 yards, 2 targets for 2 receptions, and 45 yards. So not great. He hasn't been great on the ground this year, but I think he does have a receiving upside. And so, yeah, I think he definitely has some upside. It's just a little iffy now with the James Robinson trade. But if you're really struggling at running back, then I would think he's an okay option. Second guy, which I probably would elevate above Michael Carter if you like him better after that James Robinson trade. But the second guy is Gus Edwards on the Ravens. This one's a little iffy too, just because of their backfield history on the Ravens and the fact that they often just like to run the hot hand. But Harbaugh has shown favoritism and love towards Gus Edwards. And so I think knowing that, the fact that he had a really good game on Sunday, I think should be a really good sign to take a chance on him. If he's available in your leagues, I would try to pick him up, and I would be willing to spend similar to Michael Carter, but maybe even a little more, maybe like 45% of my fab. But if you're struggling at running back, then you might have to go all in for him. But just know that I talked about Kenyon Drake last week, and so know that there are other guys that if Gus Edwards struggles in the game, or if his knee flares up again, there are other guys that can take over. So it's hard with Gus to say, yeah, spend all of your fab, because he could have a bad week, or he could just have knee soreness, and there could be another guy to take over for that week, and he could get you 2 points. So it's the security with him is definitely risky. You're not going to feel great, but I think he has a lot of upside right now. On Sunday, he had 18 points. He had 16 carries for 66 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is great. Like, the fact that they were using him at the goal line was a great sign. And I think definitely is an encouragement and a reason why you should pick him up. You're just going to feel a little iffy. Another guy who I feel like is a little iffy, but he has a lot of potential as well, is D'Onta Foreman on the Panthers. He had a very similar game to Gus Edwards. He had 18 points, but he had no touchdowns. He had 15 carries for 118 yards and 2 targets for 2 receptions and 27 yards. So these are the type of performances that you want to prioritize. At least I do personally. Like, I like going for volume over touchdown ability, just because if you have a guy going over for 100 yards on the ground, I play in a league, and I think most people do as well, where if you go over 100 yards rushing or 100 yards receiving, you get like a 1 point or 2 point bonus. And so I think that's valuable. Like, if you're playing that way in your league, to try to prioritize those guys that have that ability and have that volume to go over 100 yards. So the fact that D'Onta Foreman got 118 yards on 15 carries, I think is awesome. He is sharing snaps with Chuba Hubbard, but Hubbard did suffer an injury. Sounds like he's okay, so they're going to continue splitting going forward. But I think the fact that you have D'Onta, who is capable of producing this kind of volume, I think he's worth a flyer. I would probably take the other 2 guys ahead of him. Definitely Gus Edwards. Maybe not Michael Carter because of the trade. Like, I maybe would do Gus, D'Onta, Michael Carter. But I think with D'Onta, you're a little iffy because he's on a Panthers team and he's going to be sharing with Hubbard still. So, little iffy. But like I said, all these guys are iffy, so you kind of got to take a chance on them. So, do some research, try to figure out which guy that you prefer. I would probably go Gus Edwards, and then probably Michael Carter, and then probably D'Onta. But again, like, my opinion could change on that after I do a little more research on it and kind of see how it's trending. If James Robinson gets to New York and they're like, yeah, James Robinson is going to take over, then obviously I would do D'Onta ahead of Michael Carter. But yeah, just the thing with waiver wire, I think it's hard, especially with running backs, is you're taking chances on guys that aren't currently owned, which means that there's a chance and there's a risk of those guys continuing to be guys that shouldn't be owned. So you're taking a risk by picking them up and adding to your team because you're saying, hey, this guy has potential, even though he hasn't been owned already. And often those guys will say, well, prove to you and prove to the world and say, yeah, like I'm worth being a starting running back. And then for fantasy purposes, that's great because you picked up a guy that no one else had, and he turns out to be a great return on investment. But more often than not, you're probably going to drop him a couple weeks later, depending on how it goes. So just know that with any of these waiver wire targets, you have risk. And I think that with this week, it's a little up in the air as to their outcome and what's going to happen. But for running backs, that's what we got this week. And I think they definitely have a lot of potential. It's just going to be, there's a lot of question marks in regards to how consistent each of these guys are going to be. A couple of handcuffs, guys that are definitely under 50% rostered. But I'm not going to recommend you spending a lot of fab on them just because they are more backup running backs in case the starter gets hurt. They're going to have a role. So If you guys are playing with a lot of bench space, I would be willing to pick up one of these guys to have on my bench just in case the starter gets hurt, to where you don't have to worry about picking them up off the waiver wire because you already have them. And that's the best case scenario to have, right? To have a handcuff, to have a backup running back, and then look on Sunday and someone gets hurt and you're like, oh, I already have the backup. Great. I don't have to worry about the waiver wire. Obviously, we don't like seeing guys get hurt, but for fantasy purposes, it's about trying to stay a head step of the game, especially if you have that starter. You want to, depending on his injury history, you want to make sure that you can secure him in case anything happens to him. But a couple of handcuffs. DJ Dallas on the Seahawks. He's one that's getting a little bit more play than a regular handcuff. He's I wouldn't say sharing the backfield with Walker, obviously, because Walker is going off. But they throw him in every now and again to kind of mix it up, to give Walker a little bit of rest. So if you have Walker, I'd be willing to pick up Dallas just in case anything happens to him. But yeah, he would be the handcuff for Seattle. Sony Michel for the Chargers. I think that if something were to happen to Eckler, I think Michel and I keep saying Mitchell. I think either Sony Michel or Mitchell. That's the thing with trying to say all these names. Man, so many names in my head, and oftentimes that I don't even know how to say it straight. So I think Sony and Isaiah Spiller are probably would split time if anything happened to Eckler, but I think Sony would be probably the main beneficiary of that situation. Like, I think he would do well filling in for Eckler if anything were to happen. So he would be a guy that I'd be willing to roster. Another guy that I'm kind of leaning higher on now that from the news yesterday with the trade is JaMycal Hasty on the Jaguars. Hasty had a 60-yard touchdown run 2 weeks ago, and he showed like signs of life. He showed explosiveness. And so I think the fact that James Robinson has gone on the Jaguars, you have Travis Etienne, who is healthy, but he also was dealing with a foot injury that kept him out the whole year last year. So running backs, as you guys know, get hurt in a blink of an eye. They can get hurt instantly. And so it's good to know who the backups are. But as of right now, JaMycal Hasty is the backup to Travis Etienne on the Jaguars. And I think if anything were to happen to Etienne, I think Hasty would be very relevant. Probably more than these other guys. Like, I think Hasty, the fact that he showed us that he can go off for a 50, 60-yard touchdown run. I think if anything were to happen to Etienne, I think the Jaguars would lean into Hasty. At least I would hope so. It's hard to know, but I would like him to have him on my team if you have room. Another guy, Ty Johnson. I originally had him in the list, but I may take him out. He was going to be the backup to Michael Carter on the Jets, but now that they have James Robinson, he's going to be like the third string. So don't feel like you have to get Ty Johnson, but he's a guy to keep in mind in case anything were to happen to Michael Carter or James Robinson. All right, wide receiver waiver wire targets. First one, Paris Campbell. He went off. I talked about him a couple weeks ago. He had a really good week 6, and then week 7, he just kept going. He had 23 points, 12 targets for 10 receptions for 70 yards and a touchdown. Now, the fact that he had 10 reception out of 12 targets is awesome. I think he's a guy that we kind of just talked about with the scenario with Sam Ehlinger, that he was getting thrown to a lot because Matt Ryan was throwing 50 to 60 times a game. Now you're throwing in Ehlinger, who's not going to throw as much. And Paris Campbell is kind of like a second to third option for the Colts. So I don't expect him to get this workload moving forward. But I think he can still be relevant. I think if you have the room, I would be willing to pick him up and see how week 8 goes with Sam Ehlinger. Because Paris Campbell he's been a pretty sturdy wide receiver for the Colts. And I think the fact that they're throwing in a new quarterback who can have different chemistry than the previous quarterback. Sometimes when you make a quarterback change, like, you'll throw in a new guy who just has that chemistry with a guy that you never would have thought of. Like, think about the Cowboys with Cooper Rush. You throw in Cooper Rush, and he has an instant connection with Noah Brown. Now, it's cool that Dak is still throwing to Noah Brown now that Dak Prescott's back, but Cooper Rush was just favoring Noah Brown, and that's the reason why Brown was relevant in fantasy for a while. And so the same could be true with Ehlinger. You could throw him in. He could have a connection with Campbell, and he could prioritize Campbell over Michael Pittman. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen because we don't fully know yet, but I think it's a possibility, which is why if Paris is available and you don't have any of the other Colts wide receivers, I would be willing to pick him up if I had the roster space. Another guy that I kind of mentioned in regards to the DK Metcalf injury news is Marquise Goodwin. This one's crazy to me because Marquise has been around for a long time. He was on the 49ers for a while. And he's a little bit older receiver that hasn't been prioritized as much. He was a guy that had huge potential, but I think to a lot of people, he didn't fully reach his potential. But the fact that he had a really good game on Sunday was awesome to see. Like, I love seeing that, especially from a player that probably has dealt with a lot of pressure in the league. Like, I could imagine that feeling, but he had a really good game on Sunday. He had 22 points, 5 targets for 4 receptions for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I think the encouraging sign is that this was happening even when DK was playing. It's not like DK got hurt and then we got to throw in Marquise. Like, Gino was looking for Marquise early, which is awesome. And I think the fact that Marquise showed a lot of explosiveness, and with DK dealing with a knee injury, I think is a positive sign and a reason why you should pick him up. So I'd be willing to take a chance on him. Like, we don't know the extent of DK Metcalf's knee injury. Sounds like he probably will miss a couple weeks. And so the fact that Gino's been playing so well and he needs guys to throw to, Tyler Lockett's still dealing with an injury. And so he's been playing through it, but if Tyler Lockett, if his injury continues to get worse, they're going to need guys to throw to. And I think the fact that Gino showed some connection with Marquise on Sunday, I think is a more than enough reason to take a chance on picking up Marquise Goodwin. Another guy is Mecole, however you want to say it, Mecole Hardman on the Chiefs. He had a really interesting game. He had a great game, but it was interesting. He had 3 total touchdowns. So he had 28 points, 4 targets for 4 receptions for 32 yards and 1 touchdown. And then on the ground, he had 2 carries for 28 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a huge week, the fact that he had 3 touchdowns. He's a guy that's difficult. He's difficult to trust. He doesn't get a ton of volume, which makes him a fairly risky fantasy option and a fairly risky pickup. But he is explosive. He's explosive on the Chiefs, and I think the fact that he's on the Chiefs is just like a really big sign and a positive sign to pick him up. Like, that's the reason why you would pick him up, is because he's playing with Patrick Mahomes. He was a guy that everyone kind of wanted to be that volume guy. People were expecting him to get the majority of the targets after Tyreek left, but he hasn't. He hasn't been. It's been really interesting how they've used him. But I think if you're struggling with wide receiver right now, if you have a couple of bye weeks coming up and you have no idea who to play and you need a guy that you want to just take a chance on, you're not expecting a ton of volume, but you know that he can perform and score a lot of touchdowns, I think Mecole Hardman would be your guy. If you look at his next couple of matchups, they're pretty good. They're good opportunities. He has Tennessee, Jacksonville, and Chargers coming up after their week 8 bye. So if you have the bench space for him and you're willing to sit with him through the bye, then I would take a chance. But I think keep him in mind, because if you don't pick him up, there could be a good chance that no one else is willing to harbor them on their roster during a bye, because that's hard. That's hard to do. You may not have the bench space for it. So if you don't have the bench space for it, but you're wanting to pick him up after the bye, just keep in mind of his matchups, because there could be another guy trying to do the same thing. I think his matchups are very positive after week 8, and so I think he could be worth a stream after his bye week. But if you have the bench space for him now, might as well pick him up now. It's just often hard to do when they have a bye week. Honorable mention, guy that if you're in a deep league, all these other guys are taken, you need another guy to look for. I would look for Darius Slayton on the Giants. He had 14 points on Sunday, 6 targets for 3 receptions for 58 yards and 1 touchdown. They're going through a lot of injuries, a lot of wide receiver injuries. Their tight end just got hurt, who was being thrown to a lot. So you need guys to throw to. You can't just throw to Saquon the whole game. I mean, Daniel Jones might try to run the whole game, which is what he's been doing, but you need guys to throw to. Darius Slayton, I think, is a good wide receiver. And so if he continues to stay healthy, I think that Daniel Jones will have to look for him. I don't think he'll necessarily have a choice. So got to keep in mind, I think he could do well in the future. Another over 50% rostered honorable mention is MVS, Marquez Valdes-Scantling on the Chiefs. He's another guy like Hardman. He doesn't always get a ton of volume. He got more volume than Hardman, which is why I think I threw him in here, is just because he'll get 7 targets, which I think is really encouraging. And I think that could be a reason to take a chance on him. You're just going to feel a little bit iffy because with the Chiefs, they like to spread the ball around. So, but if he's available in your league and you want to take a chance on a Chief and you don't love Hardman, I think MVS could be worth a shot as well. A couple of tight end waiver wire targets. Juwan Johnson on the Saints. He had a really good week. He had 20 points, 5 targets for 5 receptions for 32 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's a guy that's definitely touchdown or bust. He's not going to get a ton of targets or a ton of receptions, but even getting 5 receptions is great for a tight end. I mean, if he didn't have the touchdowns, that's 1 point for reception, so 5 points, and then 32 yards. So that's like 8.2 points, which I think is not bad. The fact that tight end position is so barren right now, you kind of have to take a chance on anybody that shows a sign of life. So I think Juwan could be worth a waiver wire target, and worth a flyer. Just pick him up. And if you're struggling at tight end and you need to just go with somebody and to take a chance, I think Juwan has a ceiling for sure. I don't know if I can say it's a high ceiling, but the fact that he got 20 points, I mean, that's great. That's what you want to see out of your tight end. So I would prioritize him off the wire. He would be the first guy I would look for. Another tight end that I would try to target is Harrison Bryant on the Browns. He may be a 1-week rental. He may be a guy that you just play for week 8. Reason being is that both of the tight end options ahead of him are hurt. David Njoku is going to miss a couple of weeks with that high ankle sprain, as we talked about. And then the second tight end is Pharaoh Brown, who he could miss week 8 with a neck injury. We're kind of waiting to see what the extent of that injury is, if he's going to miss. But if both of those guys miss week 8, I think Bryant could be worth a streaming option. They play the Bengals at home. And so the Bengals defense hasn't been playing great. They've given up a lot of points, especially to the tight end position. So I think Bryant could be worth a stream for that game, but he probably is not worth a whole lot after that. So keep that in mind. So you probably would be able to get him pretty cheap if that's the case, but he would be the second guy that I would target. Quarterback waiver wire targets. I briefly talked about some of these guys. First guy I think you should try to pick up, if you haven't already, is Daniel Jones, which is kind of crazy saying that because Daniel Jones is such a hard guy to endorse. He will have these awesome games and then he'll just be garbage. But he's doing well. I mean, that Giants team is 6-1. It's hard to doubt them. You're picking up Daniel Jones knowing that he's not going to necessarily throw for a lot of yards or for a lot of touchdowns, but he has that rushing ability, which has been pretty impressive. He had 32 points. In the air, he had 30 attempts for 19 completions for 202 yards and 1 touchdown. And so it's okay. If he had that stat, you're like, it's not great. But what he did on the ground was pretty good. 11 carries for 107 yards and 1 touchdown. That's pretty impressive And so if you have a quarterback that can get 107 yards on 11 carries, and he's playing on a team that's somehow finding a way to win, he's a guy that you probably want to take a shot on. But the main reason why he's my number one right now is because of his week 8 matchup. He's playing against the Seahawks in Seattle, so keep that in mind. But playing against the Hawks for week 8, I think he could be a great streamer option. If you got a bye week, if you have an injury, I would probably look for Daniel Jones first. He would be the guy that I would stream for this week. In regards to beyond that, you're gonna kind of have to wait to see. But yeah, I would definitely try to target him as the first option. Second quarterback waiver wire target is Justin Fields. If you guys watched Monday Night Football last week, he had a really good game. He had 25 points, 21 attempts for 13 completions for 179 yards and 1 touchdown and 1 interception. And then on the ground, he had 14 carries for 82 yards and 1 touchdown. So very similar to Daniel Jones. And I think he's a very similar quarterback. I think his rushing ability is greater than Jones, but I mean, Jones has been more efficient on the ground than Fields. I think Fields is just a little more explosive, but Jones has been playing really well. But I think the fact that Justin Fields showed a little bit more consistency last night, I think he's a little bit more volatile. He's a little bit more dangerous because he's just risky on the ground. He had 3 fumbles, I think 4 fumbles last night. I think he lost I don't know if he lost any of them, but the fact that he technically had 4 fumbles is a little discouraging because next week he could end up losing most of those. But yeah, I would target him as my number 2 quarterback target. His matchups coming up in week 8, he's playing at the Cowboys, and then he's playing at home versus the Dolphins week 9. He's playing at home versus the Lions week 10, and then he's at the Falcons for week 11. So he's got some favorable matchups. I probably wouldn't play him for week 8, but if you're willing to pick him up and just hold him for weeks 9, 10, and 11, I think this could be a worthy stream option. So that's the thing about waiver wire targets. You want to try to pick up those guys that you can have for the future. And if you can pick up a guy for cheap now before he becomes expensive the next week, I think that's worth it. So like, say you don't pick up Justin Fields this week, he could become expensive fab wise next week because he's going to be playing the Dolphins. Or if you have the bench space, pick him up this week, have him on your bench, and then you have him ready to go for week 9. So that's kind of how I look at it. Third guy, quarterback waiver wire target is Sam Ehlinger. I am high on him. Like I talked about him already, but I think he could be worth a stream against the Commanders. Like, I don't trust that Commanders defense. They had Heineke playing, and so I think it's going to be like a similar game for both team. And I think with Sam's rushing ability, I think he could keep him afloat for fantasy. So if you want to go really risky, then go for Sam Ehlinger for this week, and for the weeks beyond, because we don't know how he's going to play. We don't know if he's going to be really well. I mean, the main question mark for him that I talked about is his accuracy, his passing ability. His rushing's there, and if he comes out and he surprises people with his accuracy, then I think he's going to have a lot higher ceiling than most people expect him to have. So that's the reason why I have him on here. I don't think he's going to be a quarterback 1 anytime soon, but I think he'd be a low end quarterback 2. And if he does well this week, I think he could be a higher end quarterback 2. And if you're struggling with quarterback injuries or bye weeks, I think he could be a worthy fill-in. I would prioritize these other 2 guys ahead of him as of right now. But if you're in a deep league or if you're in a super flex league, I would definitely take a shot on Sam Ehlinger. I'm prioritizing him for my waiver wire for my super flex dynasty league, because I need some help there. And so depending on your format, depending on how deep your rosters are and how deep your league is going to affect how you treat a player like Sam Ehlinger. But I I do like him, and I think that he could be worth the pickup. His matchups coming up. He's playing the Commanders in week 8. Week 9, he's playing at New England. Week 10, he's playing at Las Vegas, and then week 11, he's playing home versus the Eagles. So at least for the next 3 weeks, I think he could be worth playing. Probably won't play him against the Eagles unless he does really well the next couple of weeks, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. All right, a couple of trade targets: buy lows, buy highs, sell high, and sell low. So we're gonna kind of go through those 4 categories like we've been doing. But a guy that I would buy low on this week is Leonard Fournette. If you look at his season so far, he was playing really well in the early on in the season. The fact that he has been used as a pass catcher in the Bucs offense, I think, is really encouraging, because mostly he never was that. He never would do that. And so he's had games where he's had a lot of receptions, which I think is great for full PPR. Past couple weeks, the Bucs have done terrible. Now, I think that's a reason to buy low on him. Like the fact that the Bucs have been doing terrible, Tom Brady's been bad, everyone else has been bad. Just because of that, I don't think they're going to be terrible for forever. I think they're eventually going to pick it up. I mean, it's going to be hard to imagine the Bucs continuing to lose to terrible teams. Now, it could happen. It definitely could happen. But I would be willing to buy low on Leonard Fournette, because he's probably the lowest value you can get right now. And I think it's a matter of time before his value goes back up, before he starts doing really well. So hit up that manager, shoot that manager a text, say, hey, who would you want for Leonard Fournette? Because they could be really frustrated with how the Bucs have been playing right now. Or they could be like, I'm going to hold on to him, which is fine. If they want to hold on to him, that's fine. But I think you definitely could have a shot to try to buy low on him in this week. Guy I would buy high on. Now, I would say he's not the highest, but I think he's fairly high right now. But that's Chris Olave. I really like Chris Olave. I was kind of kicking myself for not picking him up in any of my leagues this year. But I loved him coming into this season. I think he's a great player. He's shown that on the Saints. The fact that Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry are still struggling with injuries, I think, is another reason why you should buy on Chris Olave. Chris Olave has been able to execute with Andy Dalton, which is awesome. Like, all right, he can go off with your backup quarterback. You don't even need your starters. But I really like Chris Olave's rest of the season schedule. I think it's really nice, and I think he's a guy I would be willing to try to buy high on. His value is not going to be very low right now, but I also don't think it's the highest. Like he's a guy that you're gonna have to spend a good amount to get, but he's not as high as some of the top 10 fantasy options. Like he's not going to be as high as a Jamar Chase or Devontae Adams. Like that in my mind is high. Like that's like the ceiling, but I think Chris Olave is probably a little bit below that. So it might take a little bit convincing to try to get him from the Olave manager, but I don't think his value right now is like sky high. Like I don't think he's like impossible to get. It might just be a little bit difficult. A guy I would sell high on, a guy I would trade away to try to get value from. I don't think you have to sell this player, but I think his value is probably at the highest it's going to get, and that's Tyler Boyd. I like Tyler Boyd. It's just been hard to trust him because he's on a team where they have 3 great pass catchers: Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and now Joe's also throwing to Hayden Hurst, the tight end. But Sunday was impressive. Joe Burrow was able to spread the ball out to everybody. Everybody did well. T. Higgins kind of got the straw. Like, he didn't do as well, which is why I think it could be worth trading away Tyler Boyd, because I think it's a matter of time until T. Higgins starts doing really well again. I think Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are better players than Boyd. I think obviously they're younger, they're a little bit more explosive, but Tyler Boyd is that consistent safety blanket for Joe. And so it's hard to say, hey, you should sell on a guy that had such a good past couple of weeks. But if you're worried about his workload being superseded by Jamar Chase and T. Higgins for the future, then I would be willing to trade Boyd. I think you can probably get a lot for him right now, which is why I have him on this list, because you can probably get a lot of value. If you're really struggling at running back and you're like, man, I got to trade away a guy to try to get a running back, Tyler Boyd's probably that dude. Like, if you have him and you got to try to make moves on your team because you're 2-5 now, or 3-4, I would probably look to trade Tyler Boyd. I think he could definitely get you a lot in return. A guy that I would sell low on, a guy that is probably fairly low right now, but I would be willing to try to get out of him because I would not like rostering him right now, and that's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Man, I really like Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a player, but how he's been used by the Chiefs and his inconsistencies and his turnover problems, and the fact that they like to run 3 different kind of running backs, it's hard to trust him. It was really interesting too, because coming into week 7, Sunday's game, it came out that they wanted to start their rookie instead. They wanted to start Isaiah. And so everyone's like freaking out, like, oh man, they're going to start a rookie. Like, Clyde's done. And Clyde still had an okay week. He had a touchdown. And so it's hard to sell a guy that's on a great team like the Chiefs. Like, he's on a very high-powered offense, and he does have a chance to score every week in my mind. But the volume that he gets is like none. And so there could be a guy in your league that wants to take a risk on Clyde because they know that he has a lot of touchdown potential, and they know that he's on a very high-powered offense. If there is a guy that's interested in your league, I would sell Clyde. I'd be willing to sell him. I'm not exactly sure what you can get from him right now, but with how scarce the running back position is oftentimes because of injuries, I think you can definitely leverage Clyde, and I think you can probably convince someone to buy him, especially if they're dealing with running back injuries. So, but he would probably be the guy that I'm selling low on right now. So that's the episode for this week. I hope that your record's doing okay. I know that this is the time of the season where if you're really struggling, you may have already given up. But I just want to tell you, like, it's never too late. I've seen crazy stuff happen where a guy will start out 0-5 and somehow turn it around and make the playoffs and do well in the playoffs. So don't give up. This is why I do these episodes, to try to help you guys stay up to date, to be able to figure out who to pick up off the waiver wire and guys that you can trade for. It's never too late for your season to turn around. Fantasy football is very unpredictable, and often you just kind of have to stay with it, and just stay consistent and hope for the best. So hope you guys are doing well. If you like this video, please subscribe and like it as well. It greatly helps me out. And let me know down in the comments what you guys would like me to cover for the future. If you have any starter sit questions or trade scenarios that you want my opinion on, I love answering those. So feel free to let me know down in the comments, or you can shoot me a message on Instagram. I've been interacting with a lot of you guys over the past couple weeks, and it's been a lot of fun for me. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you guys do well for week 8. So I hope you guys have a good one, and we will see you later.